Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. Welcome to our JV Trends and Projections webinar. My name is Lindsay and I'm the Vice President of Customer Success for Fedmine. I'm joined today by two subject matter experts, Patrick McMullen and Doug DeFazio. Just a few housekeeping items before we get into our presentation for today. I would appreciate if everyone can use the Q&A feature versus the chat if you have any questions. We will be sure to address all of the questions at the end of our presentation. We'll also be sending all of the slides and the recording to all registrants following our presentation today. Founded in 2004, Fedmine is a business intelligence platform that analyzes and simplifies the increasingly complex federal business landscape in real time. We provide our clients the visibility they need into their addressable market of business opportunities. With Fedmine, you can receive twice daily alerts based on opportunities and contracts within your addressable market, build a pipeline of recompete and newly forecasted solicitations, dissect your competition, quickly view agency profiles, and much more. At the end of today's presentation, I'll show a sneak peek of Fedmine and specifically how you can view AEC and JV data. The beauty of Fedmine is that you can tailor it to any market. How do we do this? Well, we integrate from 17 different sources and it's all done via our back-end database technology. So there is no manual intervention. For the most part, we are updating our sources daily and weekly. Some of those sources include FPDSNG, Beta.SAM, USA Spending, GAO bid protests, and GSA. While our main clientele are government contractors, both large and small, primes and subs, really anyone who has a need for federal spending data can use Fedmine. This includes federal agencies, PTACs, and various other support organizations. I'm pleased to formally introduce our speakers for today. Patrick McMullen is a retired Air Force bioenvironmental engineer with 30 years of experience in federal business development. He's currently working as an independent consultant with a focus on proposal writing and is also authoring a step-by-step book to teach small businesses how to prepare SF 330 proposals. Doug DeFazio is the Vice President of Special Projects for Bluestone Environmental Group. He has more than 35 years of experience and expertise creating new service lines for emerging and seasoned businesses, establishing new clients for existing services, opening new geographic opportunities nationwide, and starting new operations. Doug has also served on various boards of direction in support of small businesses and is a past president and member of the board of directors of CBAC. He's tracked various DoD trends with small business joint ventures since 2008 and has presented their data at various regional conferences. And with that, I will turn it over to Pat.
And Lindsay, as you know, we're having some issues down here, and just so you know, I lost the signal, but I don't think that's a problem because I have a copy of the slides. So if you're okay, I'm gonna proceed without actually seeing.
Yes, go for it. Yeah, Pat is down there in Texas and experiencing the effects of this storm. So yeah, we will move forward as best we can.
I'm sure we're going to be okay. So yeah, assuming that you're on the first slide for me, and let me just say to everyone, good morning from frozen southern Texas, where we have rolling blackouts and all of our major highways are closed, and we got a half foot of snow. I hope you're all tuning in from somewhere where it's safe and warm. Let me just jump into this. All the data that we discuss today comes from a review of small business JV awards. JVs have been rising among large businesses also, but that's beyond the scope of today's presentation. We have only looked at 3 markets, as are shown: architect and engineering, construction, and environmental. Specifically, we limited our work to the 4 NAICS codes that are shown on the screen. When we did the data mining within the Fedmine software, we just limited it to those 4 NAICS codes. As you see on the slide, we only looked at task order contracts, MATOCs, and SATOX. And we only looked at the DoD instead of the entire federal government. The reasoning for those limits is really pretty simple. For the three markets we're discussing, DoD task order contracts are well over 95% of all federal government awards in those markets. And again, as we roll through all of the slides, as we discuss the remaining bullets, keep in mind all of the observations, comments, and conclusions, they're all about data in these three markets, in the DoD, and for small businesses only, unless we specify otherwise. Go ahead, next slide. And now just bear with me 1 second, because I'm going to pull my copy of the slides up on the screen so I can see exactly what the viewers are. And I really apologize. We've really had some pretty crazy weather all along. Objectives. When we're done here today, what we want you to understand is where things were as of the last time Doug and I briefed this, which was at the SAMI National Conference in Dallas in November of 19. We looked at the data up to the end of fiscal 18. From there, we summarize on what we saw when we looked at the, what we'll summarize today is what we saw in the last 2 fiscal years. There's no mystery about what's happening, and we'll briefly explain what we see as driving the current trends. Although it's obviously our personal opinion, I think it's kind of generally accepted what's happening. Will Rogers once said there's 3 kinds of liars. There's liars, there's damn liars, and then there's statisticians. The data can be misleading with regards to JVs, and we do, towards the end of my half of this, want to clarify some major points before you go off and start forming a new JV or any more additional JVs. As far as the pendulums, this is the federal government, and the pendulum always swings. The issue is when and how, which we will touch on. Those are the objectives for the first half of the presentation, which is really where we talk about the data. In the second half of the presentation, which is literally the more interesting part, Doug will highlight some of the major issues as a result of all that we're talking about on the data side, and some of the unintended consequences. And Lindsay, you can go to the next slide, which should be the JV trends. For those who are new to the federal government, a quick but important perspective. There are about 2,000 entities in the federal government that can make contract awards. For the 3 markets of interest, which we said at the beginning, engineering, construction, environmental, about 90% of all DoD awards come from a very small group of less than 25 agencies. That's about 10 different Army Corps of Engineering districts, the NAVFAC, the Naval Facility Engineering Commands, and a single entity in the Air Force, which is the AFCAC, which just happens to be here in San Antonio. We've been tracking the rise of JVs since 2000. Those agencies or their predecessors have been our focus over the last 20 years. And 20 years ago, it was really unusual to see any JVs at all among small businesses with any DoD agency. And the few JVs that did win awards during that early time period, they were always under the old 8A mentor protege program. The game completely changed in 2017 with the all small mentor protege program. And regarding the last bullet, when Doug and I briefed trends at the end of fiscal 18, we saw some markets where some specific instances where JV awards were approaching 50%. And indeed, I think we had one single MATOC award where there were 5 out of 5 that were JVs, but in general, they were approaching 25% overall as an average. That's where we were 24 months ago. Lindsay, the next slide, please. Now, the problem with data, notwithstanding Will Rogers' comment, is that you can find all kinds of patterns. And we'll go into a few details in this and the next two slides. But this slide summarizes really the main points that I wanted to convey in the first half of this presentation. First and foremost, as I think most of the people in this audience knows, JV's the number of JV awards for small businesses across these three markets, it just keeps going up. Having said that, when we dug into the data, the rise over the last 2 years, it was really significant. It was certainly more than what I expected. Specifically, for architectural and engineering awards and environmental NAICS codes, it was close to 50% as an average. And I'll go back to an earlier comment. 24 months ago, the average was 25%. For construction, if you compare awards to the architectural and engineering and environmental markets, it's lower. It's still running a little bit over 20%. That is misleading, and I'm going to explain that in the next slide. And Lindsay, if you would, you can go to the next slide. And I'll manually do that. We've gathered data on close to 200 task orders and contract awards over fiscal 19 and 20. And we only looked at 3 markets, and we only looked at the DoD. In general, we used Fedmine almost exclusively, and Lindsay will show you at the end of this some of the data mining reports that we used later. And those reports focused on a large population of awards across the DoD. I will skip over that right now, and she'll actually do a demo later on. We also drilled down into specific DoD agencies to take a look at specific awards that we had been tracking separately. Now that's what we did. Let's talk about what we found. And next slide, please. And Lindsay, just to make sure that we're in sync, this is the slide that has at the top of it observations. And
correct, 37%.
Okay, good. I'm nervous about I'm nervous about having lost the internet at this late point. Anyway, the first bullet: 30% of first-time small business AMI awards were JVs. Specifically, 2 out of every 5 firms that had never won a contract with the Army, when they won their first contract, they did it using a JV. That's just one more validation that the JV strategy, which is growing because it's working. The greatest rise was with awards to AEs. The average was 45%. Now, let me divert here a second. Before I discuss the environmental and construction awards, I need to comment on the ANC and the Tribal 8A awards. Again, as many of you on this call know, they're a unique small business. One firm, which is almost universally one of many, is typically one of a very large family of what is called sister companies. That single firm can use the quals of their sister companies without a JV. So an Alaska Native corporation or a tribal individual small business will show up in our data search as a non-JV. But that doesn't mean that that small business didn't have additional quals that they were using from one or more other firms, in this case, their sister firms. Additionally, the ANCs and tribal firms, when they use one of their 8A firms, receive a statistically very large portion of their DoD awards via sole source. An important caveat, and I will come back to that. So again, in our data, they do not show up as a JV, but they're not an independent small business. Now, with all that said, environmental JV awards were close behind A&E at just over 40%. But again, that doesn't mean that 60% of the awards were going to independent small businesses. You would have to factor out all those awards that went to ANC and tribal competitive firms. Construction was about 80% in 18, and it did not statistically rise in 19 or 20. But, and I just want to see if I can, I'll do my best to make this really simple. If you took $100 million worth of awards to small businesses in construction in 19 and 20, and you're an independent small business, you would not assume that 80% went to independent small businesses. Of that 80%, close to half of that would have gone in 19 and 20 to ANCs and tribal firms who did not need to form a joint venture to show $100 million worth of bonding or to show a wide breadth of quals. And so I'll leave it at that. Lindsay, next slide, please. I don't think there's any mysteries here. The All Small Men Are Protege program opened doors in 2017 to far more small business categories, all the small business categories. That's half of what it did. The other half of what it did is it just made it a whole lot easier for all small businesses to form a JV. So that's part of the trends. As again, I'm sure many of the folks who are dialed in are part of a JV with a large business, and you know firsthand that industry has come a long way, especially beginning around 2014, because of some changes on learning how to make a JV successful. So not only is it easier to form a JV, not only is it open to all small businesses, but we've come a long way in the last 7 years in terms of knowing how to make a JV work to a client's satisfaction. Speaking of clients, from the DoD client perspective, why wouldn't the agencies see a small business backed by a large business as a lower risk? The last time I talked to my CPA, I was still a taxpayer. Why would I be against any government client looking to lower their risk by picking a small business backed by a large business? And as far as the FAR evaluation procedures, I recently wrote a small business proposal for a 30-person small business. Their major competitor was another small business, much smaller than ours, backed by a 15,000 employee large business. The FAR evaluation process does the right thing. It looks at risk. So it compared my 30 employee client against a small business backed by 15,000 employees. Those 15,000 employees, they were counted as the prime, as were all of their qualifications. Point made. Lindsay, next slide, please. Now, is it that easy? Well, the answer is no. Skip to the last bullet. Most JVs fail. Statistically, the overwhelming majority of JVs formed either between two small businesses or under the ASMPP between a small and a large, they fail. How can we tell you about all this rise in JV awards and then say most JVs are unsuccessful? It's actually very simple. And and I know this firsthand. Most JVs are simply not well thought out. There's a lot of process that has to occur in the upfront strategy and structure of a JV. And then you still need to do all of the capture planning and positioning required for any firm, JV or not, in order to win. If you didn't do the upfront work with the strategy when you form the JV and the structure in terms of how you're going to share the work, and you didn't follow through with the ongoing work, the capture planning, the positioning, your JV is not likely to win. In the book, I state that you can't gain or you can't win in the final 30 days what you lost in the previous 30 months. And there's a lot that has to happen to have a winning JV. But Doug and I are in agreement on the need and the value of forming JVs, but how to do it is another whole topic. I'm not sure, and I'll let Lindsay address this when we're done, our part. We're looking at a date in March where we're going to do a standalone presentation and only talk about how to form and implement a winning JV. It really is a whole other topic, and it's beyond the objectives set for today. Lindsay, you can go to my last slide. We don't see any change. We don't see any change on the short run. If you ask me, will things change in 21, 22, and probably into 23? My professional opinion is no. And if you say, well, why is that? Because of contract actions already made, we just don't really see anything changing on the short run. Now, will it eventually swing? Sure. Part of the fun in doing these periodic data dives and then presenting presentations like today, which are typically done at SAMI regional or national conferences, is we look at the regulatory changes and we try to identify what's going to happen and when. But for now, let me give control to Doug, who will address what I consider the more interesting aspects of this presentation, which are the issues and possible changes. Doug, the show is yours.
Thank you, Pat. And again, thanks to Fedmine for putting this together. Just a caveat as I get into my presentation is my entire career has been on the small business side. This is not my intent to bash large businesses during my presentation. My intent is to just talk about what is happening and some of the what I feel were unintended consequences of the All Small Mentor Protege program. Also, just kind of bear with me. I'm very comfortable giving these presentations when I can see at least one of you is paying attention to me. So I'm going to assume that at least one of you out there is paying attention and focus that way. Actually, decreasing small business dollars we see for two major reasons. One, because the joint venture rule requires the procuring agency consider for past performance purposes work done individually by each partner to the joint venture, as well as any work done by the joint venture itself previously. And because these set-aside contracts permit mentor protege and other joint ventures proposing as a prime to leverage the experience and technical strengths, and because the intent behind the All Small Mentor Protege program is to promote such leveraging, independently operating small businesses are, in effect, competing against large businesses for small business set-asides. Because such large businesses are not governed by the annual revenue or employee headcount limits governing size standard, small businesses are operating at a significant, if not insurmountable, competitive disadvantage. Small business concerns that are not equipped to compete regularly with large firms are now forced into mentor-protege relationships with large businesses in order to be deemed competitive. I believe that this has become competitively necessary, even if the bona fide need for a mentor is otherwise limited or even non-existent. Further, because to stay competitive, a small business is forced to partner with a large business mentor and to propose as a joint venture. The large business has undue leverage in teaming negotiations. While the rule requires that the small businesses portion of the work, quote, must be more than administrative or ministerial functions, unquote, large business members can still perform up to 60% of the work that is performed by the mentor-protege joint venture partners. So basically, prior to this rule, a small business could perform 70 to 80% of the work with a large business sub. Now, a large business can do 60% of the work that the JV does, meaning that small business is now relegated to 40% of what the JV performs, which may really be around 20% of the entire contract, as compared to 70% prior to the implementation of this program. Independent small businesses have seen market share dwindle or disappear. Alternatively, such firms are now forced to partner with large businesses, thereby having to endure a business model with significant less self-performance. Moreover, when such small businesses can no longer play the role of protege, they are forced to compete on their own, potentially against a new crop of proteges being mentored by the exact same large businesses currently performing the lion's share of the set-aside work. Thus, their growth is not only impeded, but I think their survival potentially threatened. Next slide, please, Lindsay. Large businesses can, in fact, decide which small business they actually want to be competitive in their procurement. Do you want a small business that can self-perform the majority of the work? Or do you want to sell a small business that needs you to do the majority of the work? Another way that large businesses can determine which small businesses are involved is that they have the staff and the dollars to target procurements in advance, and they spend the time and the money necessary to introduce their teams to clients, produce marketing packages, etc. They can also have more than one protege over the long haul. And in my opinion, this really limits opportunities for small businesses to grow. Patrick shared with me that when he reviewed the award data for every single DoD agency studied in this effort, there was typically a very small pool of less than 10, typically, often less than 5 large businesses who are the long-term incumbents. So in reality, for each agency, there's a small pool of potential mentors, each of whom are heavily sought after as mentors, and each of those firms can only have one protege at a time in each market. The data also supports the reality that these mentors are extremely successful in getting their joint ventures awards. Therefore, small businesses have either been competing on a grossly tilted playing field or forced to reluctantly team with large businesses, even if that small business does not otherwise need the type of financial and technical assistance the Mentor Protege program was intended to facilitate. The net result is less or even no contract work for small businesses that hold their ground, or a devastating reduction in actual work for the firms that succumb to that competitive pressure and enter into a joint venture. You've probably heard that there are more small business set-asides available now, or probably more specifically heard that there are less contracts available for large businesses. That might actually be true. However, the irony is that the vast majority of the set-aside work goes to those large business mentors. Thus, while agencies are able to report more dollars being awarded under set-aside contracts, the reality is that large businesses are performing the majority of the work. Even worse, in my opinion, is that because the procurements are awarded as set-asides, the large business now has zero contractual obligations to negotiate, have approved, or even make good faith efforts to comply with the small business contracting plan. In addition, the SBA is tasked with tracking joint venture rewards and reviewing joint venture certifications, the annual performance of work reports that ensure mentor protege teams are complying with the performance work requirements. The SBA's last estimate of firms taking advantage of the All Small Mentor Protege program represented a roughly 500% increase in the number of mentor protege relationships currently being managed by the SBA. This is totally unrealistic when you consider how understaffed the SBA already is, resulting in their personnel being overtasked and stretched thin in performing the many functions already required by the rules. Next slide, please, Lindsay. My entire career has been spent trying to build and grow companies. I've spent most of my 35 years in this industry in the 8A space, and I very much believe in the 8A, in the Small Business Administration's 8A Business Development Program. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that all 4 of the previous 8A firms I've worked with are all still thriving as small businesses, mostly because they took the correct type of advantage of that 8A program and learned how to be a business. It's my opinion that this may no longer be the case, or for sure it'll be more difficult to achieve. This new rule opens a very real strategy of starting a small business, hiring very few staff, getting into a mentor protege with a large business, letting that large business do all the work at a markup, of course, assuming the SBA is too understaffed to check that you are even doing a small amount of the work. Then after a successful and brief run, fire your staff, fold your firm, put a bunch of money in your pocket and walk away. I hope this doesn't happen, but I think we are actually seeing it occur now, and I expect it to get worse. Next slide, please. So you can see here in November, Small Business Administration did come out with some new regulations. Basically, that says that for set-asides, agency must consider the capabilities, past performance, and experience of first-tier subcontractors, as well as the small business prime contractor. The caveat, obviously, is that this is in the SBA regs, not yet in the FAR. So contracting officers need to update RFPs in accordance with the SBA rules. SBA regs apply even if they are not yet in the FAR. And if this is not addressed, the procurement may be open to protest. We're asking an awful lot of already overworked and understaffed pool of contracting officers. If you look at the decline over the last 10 years of total contracting officers, even in the DoD, we now more than ever need COs that are experienced and have this internal support that they need in order to update RFPs in accordance with SBA regs, even if those regs are not yet in the FAR. We also need help to educate our clients' legal staff to understand the regulations and not just the FAR. But to close, I expect multiple award contracts and joint ventures to continue to dominate in the construction, AE, and environmental arena. Next slide. I know Pat.
JV awards continue to rise. My opinion is influenced by the data, and I say absolutely.
Number 2, is it in the best interest of the small business community? I certainly do not think it is.
Is it really easy to win a DoD contract using a JV? We're going to do a whole session on that. The short answer is it takes a lot of upfront work. If you do all your upfront work, yeah. If you don't have a chance.
Anyone noticing that small businesses are getting less share of the work? Well, Fedmine certainly has. I most definitely have. And now I hope that most of you have as well. Will this change? I hope so. With a deeper understanding of these unintended consequences of the All Small Mentor Protege program, maybe we can help the pendulum swing back even slightly and allow small businesses to take advantage of the program to grow and become sustainable firms for years to come. Back to you, Lindsay.
Thank you so much, Doug and Pat. That was great. And we do have some questions which we will address here after this quick sneak peek of Fedmine. And I can show you all a bit about how we got some of the data for this presentation. We actually did a similar presentation about a year ago, Pat and myself, and we created this AEC JV Trends dashboard that you can see here on my screen. This is looking at the past 3 fiscal years and primarily USACE and NAVFAC within those 4 NAICS that Pat had identified up front. And you can actually see here the upward trends across many of these industries and agencies. Specifically want to call out environmental consulting for NAVFAC here with almost 40% of those small business awards going to JVs, as well as the USACE engineering NAICS here with almost 30%. And to drill into the data, you can actually see who are those JVs that are winning, what are these task orders that they're winning, and you could get into all of the details here in Fedmine. So everything is just very much interactive. I'm just going to click here into the total dollars for, figured that would happen with the timeout here. Bear with me. My screen sat idle for too long. I'll come back to that. Going into our USACE dashboard, I noticed, the same thing, the same trends that we've been talking about that Pat and Doug have identified. You can actually drill down on a specific division, and from there you can go into the awards for a district. And so I was just looking at Fort Worth because that was where the most dollars were awarded, and the very first company listed here is a JV. You can see these are ranked by the total obligations that those companies have received. And so as I scroll down the list, you can just see those JVs jumping out at you. So this was for last fiscal year for the Fort Worth USACE district. Let me go back now to the joint venture dashboard. This is what I meant to do previously. This is looking at USACE for the engineering services NAICS. These are all of the JVs who won an award in FY20. Close to 30% of those small businesses were JVs. As I mentioned before, you can drill down into the data. You can actually see the various different contract descriptions, and then you can always go into the details. And so we can see the MATOC that it was awarded under, task order summary, and of course you can take a look at the original RFP that this award resulted from. And so I believe when I looked at this earlier, there are 3 other JVs on this particular MATOC award. Pat mentioned the first timers. So we actually have a suite of reports in Fedmine. It's first time contractors. And what that means is that it is a unique DUNS number and they have never won a contract with the federal government as a prime before. They might have other commercial work, they might have won as a sub, but this is the first time they're winning a contract with the federal government. The filters I applied to this were for the Army within those 4 NAICS, those 4 industries we've identified. And actually 35% of the total awards, both large and small, at the Army within these NAICS went to JVs. 37% of the small business awards went to JVs. So it just increased a little bit, but that just goes to show, how many JVs are winning awards, let alone forming. 2 other quick things before we open up to questions. I just wanted to highlight an industry report that you can easily run in Fedmine. We're looking at the 236220 NAICS and just showing some quick data points here. The spending is rising, big jump here between FY19 and 20. Hopefully it will continue that way. You can see what set asides are being used within that industry, who are the top primes, the top bureaus, and of course the top agencies. And then lastly, and I know Pat used a lot of this for his analysis, was looking at those actual awards, the award notices within those 4 NAICS codes and those agencies. And you can see here this award that came out earlier this month, multiple award construction contract. I have the list of awardees pulled up, but 3 of them are JVs, as you can see here. So that was just a quick look at Fedmine. Wanted to explain a bit how we were able to get that data. But again, as I mentioned up front, Fedmine can be tailored to any industry. It just so happens that we're focusing on this for today. So let me bring back up our contact information to share with you all while we get to these questions. If you feel you have a question that arises after this, you can always reach out to myself, Pat, or Doug. But let me go ahead and address some that have come in. So Pat and Doug, with regard to JV failure, what is the definition or benchmark for that you're using?
The fact that they are either getting no work at all after multiple submissions, or else they're getting something where let me give you a specific example. A JV finally won an award after 14 submissions. How do you make money when you spent the money on putting together? I was an A&E. When you put together 14 SF330s, you're so deep in a hole, you're not going to get out of it by winning 1 AE contract.
Thanks, Pat. Another question is, does a SBLB JV have to be an SBA approved mentor protege JV to qualify as a prime for an SBA set aside AE contract?
If I understood the question, if it's a SBLB, large business, the answer to the question is yeah, absolutely. There's no, you can't use the large businesses. Yeah, you know what? I got to be very careful here. If you're wanting to use the large business quals, their projects, their data in section H, their resumes, and show it as a prime, then the answer to your question is it has to be via JV, and that JV has to be under ASMPP.
Or else you would be too large. You would not be eligible for the size.
Yeah, that's right. You could do it, but you'd be large.
Okay, thanks. Let me go. I know we had an emailed question, so I'm trying to get to that. Actually, if I can call on one of my colleagues here, Leela, if you could ask the emailed question, or I can't get back to it when I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, let me look for that.
While you're doing that, I just want to announce to the world that as soon as Doug started talking, my video feed came back. So for whatever it's worth.
Welcome.
Okay. You guys ready? There were actually two in this email. Can a JV bid a set aside opportunity prior to receiving an authorization letter from the SBA?
This is Doug.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah,
Could you
yeah. This is it. Yes. The short answer is yes.
Okay.
Obviously, that would be done at risk, and you would for sure need an established JV, so you could get a DUNS number and registered in SAM.
Okay, thank you. And then if a JV wins a bid, will that shorten the review approval timeline?
That's a great question, and my answer is I would really hope so, but maybe not, I guess, because theoretically, I guess you in the best of all worlds, you're in constant communication with your small business person. Once you submit it, you let your small bit, the SBA know why you submitted your application and what proposal for. And so it's been my experience that they're very willing to work with you in that type of situation. But again, only if you start the relationship off on the right foot. I mean, relationships are all two ways. So if you do something late and don't involve the SBA, they might not be on your side when it comes time. So like any relationship, treat it with respect.
So we actually have someone from the SBA on the webinar who typed to me in the Q&A, and I'm just going to read this aloud based on the two last recent questions. The JV must meet applicable requirements in 125.8 BD, including a written certification to SBA and the CO before performance that it complies with SBA requirements, including 40% of work. SSC contribution does not count. So thank you for that. One last question that we have here: can first-time JV submit an offer for a DoD contract if they request past performance as a JV?
Doug, I'm not aware of a RFP where they would ask for past performance of the JV.
I've seen it, and I guess it usually it's all three, right? Either singularly or together. And typically they caveat that request with if you don't have past performance as a JV, then past performance individually is accepted.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
And then one last thing from our friend here at the SBA, just as a follow-up to that previous question. A JV seeking a competitive 8A award need not obtain SBA approval of its JV agreement before award, but must satisfy 124.513C and D. So I think I have addressed all of the questions that we've received. If you do have other questions that come up or you'd like to discuss Fedmine and data, opportunities and spending data, please feel free to reach out to myself. And then of course our SMEs, Patrick and Doug. And we really appreciate you guys partnering with us today, and Pat fighting through all of those weather issues down there. We were able to pull it off successfully. So thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining. We will be sending out these slides and the recording to all registrants later this afternoon. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Adios, Doug.
Thanks, guys.